because when you can start giving yourself pleasure, you can pull yourself out of depression in a 5 minutes by just touching yourself and having pleasure. And some people may think that's dirty. Well, fuck you, because it was taken from us, and we need to get okay with that again. And once we're owning our own genitals and what we want and our pleasure, we're not going to stand for lovers that don't meet us, and we're not going to have no conversation and wait around and expect that they're going to figure it out. No, you're going to be a wild ass lover that loves yourself, and in so doing does the same for them. And it might trigger the shit out of them, but that's the way to heal.
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Support Sister. I am your host, Anya Day, and in today's episode I am interviewing Paul Hanrieder. He is a sexual empowerment healer, and we just really dive into sexual awakening and healing processes to really reclaim your power that is within yourself, rooted in the root chakra, and some modalities to get back into your power. This was such a great episode. I learned so much and felt so empowered after, so I hope you feel the same. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing this video. It means a lot. Please enjoy. So, what's up, world? Woo! I got Paul with me. Paul is just like such an amazing soul and just spits so much valuable truth and insight, and I love Paul's talks, so we decided to join forces and come on live today and just share some stories for the collective. I spoke with Paul just a few days ago, and we just connected right from the bat, so we figured why not broadcast for the whole world.
Absolutely. It was fun.
yeah it was great. So just to quickly dive in, Paul works as a healer through like the alchemy of sex magic and the root, right? Just like healing the root. And like I just speaking to you that first time, like you activated something within me, in my root chakra, in my sexual energy, something that just I buried and I forgot about, but it is really just the powerhouse to living, to feeling. And I thank you for what you had done just by speaking to me over the phone. You're magic.
Well, what I looked at it a little bit since you communicated back and said that happened, but we shared a very deep presence and a deep level of intimacy and vulnerability about who we were. And intimacy isn't a word of specifically sexuality or touching or any of that kind of stuff. It's about just getting really real about who we are and what we've been and how it's been and how it's awful or good or bad or whatever. And I really had to do that for myself for so long in my life. And I just share that with anybody. It's like a really strong held space. We didn't like set a held space or do any saging or whatever. We just really got down into it, and the trust grew like immediately. And each time we'd share and we'd feel it in our heart, and the truth was there, and we just keep going deeper. And then you shared some really vulnerable stuff. You just kind of came out, and I didn't even ask for it. And that vulnerability and that depth and that witnessing, because I shared with you in a text earlier, do a little research about what a hollow bone is. But when we really get to our depth of our awakening, we're just witnessing ourselves through another person. So to be a hollow bone is to just sit there with you, and then there's some stuff you needed to know, and it wasn't even me that thought it. It just came through me, and it was your higher self just saying, bang, and whacking you on the head with the exact words that you needed to make that choice and really trust yourself that that thing you might have thought was actually true. And it was now validated by another person that saw all of you, and it was beautiful. And we got into the talking about the sexuality side of it, which it guarantees a vulnerability and a bypassing of our shame and guilt personally with another, because now you have to go and talk about these things. And we weren't talking about sex acts or anything like that. We were talking about how critical this is, and we got to get back to our root energy. And we talked about how every trauma that we have or thing that our dad does to us or mom does to us or whatever turns into these little bubbles of unresolved, unexpressed emotions. And then we just keep pushing them down, and we build all these armors and all these rules, and we build this cage for ourselves until it's in our root chakra, and that's as low in our chakras as you can go, and it ends up in our genitals, and as men it's in our asses. And people walk around and now they have pain in their sexuality, they have dryness, they have all this kind of stuff because all this wounding is stuck in there. And we talked about cervixes and how the womb is like just closed right off. And once you get to that truth of all that kind of stuff and you realize that all those pains and all those hurts are there, there's no way it's ever going to come up here because we poured 30 feet of concrete up here and our heart is all enclosed. So what we talked about is how those bubbles, they can actually be felt in a woman's yoni or whatever, as well as in a man's ass, if a woman wants to explore that or heal her. And once we expel those, we go to that point and use our pleasure or orgasms or move our energy or breath or whatever. Those little things is the foundation that all our armor is built on. And if we can explode those things and through pleasure and orgasm and all these kind of things, talking about it and getting to some real truth with someone, all our armor starts to implode. We don't even recognize it. It's like a bridge built, and now all of a sudden all those concrete posts they poured on the bottom of the river are gone. And all of a sudden you're questioning yourself. You're saying, okay, it's safe to be with men now. It's safe to talk to my dad. It's safe to what all these things and all these rules that we put. And now we start to become free. Our psyche breaks down. But you could spend 30 years with a psychologist and do therapy and desensitize this. And anytime anybody talks to you, all your rules come up and you're just defending yourself and running away, when really we just need to get back to our pleasure. And it starts with our personal pleasure. It's not about going and finding someone to fill us or whatever. It's about getting back in touch with our body.
Yeah.
And
no, that was beautiful. Beautiful. But just to piggyback on what you said, but just like, yeah, like feeling your body again. Like, how many times throughout the day are you even paying attention to the food that you're consuming, or to just like the joy of like doing a hobby or activity like painting and like actually feeling that sensuality behind it? Like food could be just like that, just like it's like an orgasm for your mouth in a sense. And it's like throughout the day you're just like trying to gobble it down and like go on the next thing, or you're on your phone just getting distracted, and we've lost sight of that as well, I feel.
Well, we get trapped in busyness, and busyness is complete distraction. Anybody that's got trauma, once you've explored it a little bit, you'll understand that you don't actually live in your body anymore, because your body's that place that can be hurt, and your safety isn't in your body anymore. It's because you made a mistake or did this wrong thing or went in this room, or your dad or your mom or whoever did your things to you. So you're not safe. So you literally are sitting in your auric field a foot or so above your body, and just like simple things like grounding your toes into the carpet or going and walking in the grass and feeling it starts to pull us down. Simple things like brush the back of your arm with your fingers or whatever. A lot of people won't even feel that. And then when they feel that, they get it and they get shivers, and then they're starting to get pulled back to their body. Their body is afraid of being touched because some of that is where it was, right? So how do you get back to trust your body? You have to go on dates with yourself for a little bit. And right now is the perfect time. Like, I'm going to have an Epsom salt bath with flower petals on the top and some nice perfume and then candles. And then you're going to come back and lay down in your bed, and you're going to caress yourself and put oil on and all this kind of stuff. Feel it in your feet, great. Squeezing your feet and just putting that and that sensuality of the oil and the slipperiness and that kind of stuff. And then you'll start to know what pleasure is in your body again. It's not all pain, because the flip side of trauma and all that stuff that's now held down, you are become what's called hypervigilant. So you are looking for any possible way to be good and stay safe and watch out. And not, I had a car accident the other day, so now I'm hypervigilant looking behind, and I got to collect myself, run into somebody again or whatever. Those are all results of trauma. And now we're trying to blame ourselves, when instead we should be just living in a universe where things happen for us, not to us. And then get to the bottom, sit in really deep presence and breathe and say, what's going on here? Why does this feel so bad in my body? And then you start to get back in touch with your body, and you'll start understanding. Do you know what myofascia are? Okay, so in our body, we have this spider web of little wee tiny muscles that are between our ribs and in our arms and all this kind of stuff. That's where our trauma is stored. It goes into our myofascia. So haven't you ever felt that where your
Yes.
chest feels really tight and your ribs are being pulled
Yes.
together all the time? Go and push in between them and it hurts like hell because there's all these little muscles that are on 24/7 and you don't know why. Because your trauma is trapped in them. So start moving them and breathing them, and you'll start to understand that's that hypervigilance. Your whole body is just braced for impact, and your safety is reliant on you watching for anything to happen. The headspace of something bad's going to happen, and you're just like eating yourself up, and you're expecting the worst all the time so that you don't get hurt anymore.
And by doing so, you kind of manifest that expectation.
And it's happening, and it tells you it's true. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. And I feel like we are just kind of like circulating in the same patterns blindly. And it's like we so deeply crave this love, this intimacy, but we're so, again, on the flip side, afraid of having it. Like, I love the idea of it, but to actually have it, like, oh my gosh, like that is unworldly to me.
So how did we get it from our conversation? You explain your side of the experience. How did we get to intimacy? How did you open and trust enough over that process? Because I just built a space to have a great conversation, and something more deep and beautiful came out of it.
I was just feeling safe to communicate like everything and without the fear of being judged, and then just like sharing like my past patterns. I feel like with partners, like you want to appear normal and perfect and get like kept together. And so like for me, like in the past, like I would have this, I'm perfect, like I've never been hurt before, like it's all good. But like actually revealing your scars and your wounds is just the path to freedom, and having that experience with you was just so liberating.
Beautiful. So you had watched a bunch of my lives in the past and you resonated with them, and I'm like hyper honest about what's going on in my life. There's nothing to hide because we're all having shitty awakening bits where all our stuff is bubbling up and it doesn't feel good and you don't know why. But to be really honest about them is really the only way to freedom in my heart. So I'll talk about anything and talk about the hardest thing in the world to talk to somebody that you hardly know, especially a man to a woman, would be things about sexuality. But I know in my heart and of hearts that if we can't get back to that innocence and purity of our playful little selves, which is really our sexuality as adults, we are trapped. And that's why some religion, government, the way our families talk and stuff, they suppress sexuality because nobody's really free in it and they're all terrified. And the control mechanism understands that it's our path to freedom. We can give ourselves every drug we've ever imagined through our orgasmic bliss. This all comes out of our brain, and it creates even spirit molecules like DMT and take us on journeys and kind of stuff. But none of those people want us to have that, because that would make us free, and it gives us an ability to flush our systems and relax. That moment after orgasmic bliss with yourself or a partner, if you struggle with meditating, I will teach you right here and right now. Go and give yourself the biggest orgasm you can, and I'll teach you things like breath work and other stuff, and you're going to be in instant meditative state for as long as you allow it after you finish. They don't call it the eat mort for no reason in orgasm. That's all death, because your whole body, you have to give up all those myofascia, all those things in your body. You're just like, oh, and you got to breathe and you got to whatever for those seconds. And then all this beautiful multitudes of oxytocins and healing things come out. And for a minute, you're going to see the world for its truth. And if you can be taught processes, and this is the stuff that I want to teach people, to breathe and now do your spiritual work, or set an intention with that energy before it overflows into your body, or how to pull it up while you're experiencing, then you understand your sexuality for yourself. And then when you're ready, you share that with a partner. And then there's things like alchemy and electric fields and magnetic fields that are different between man's and women's bodies, and that intercourse and penetration and all these other energies all become part of a dance of alchemy, initiation, of shifting. There's stuff that, why do you think they're men and women made? You can't get all the way into a high sacral space. Like, for example, a man can maybe get up to about chakra 6 with his sexuality. A woman can get 8 or 9. So how is a man going to feel his fullest self-expression without a woman to be able to get to that? But without the stimulation and all those other things, the woman can't get anywhere near 8 or 9. So we're not meant to be solo beings. We're meant to be in partnership.
Yeah.
And that's marriage. That's sharing an experience with another person of depth and vulnerability that you wouldn't normally share. And a cool thing that I want people to understand that you experience, it's much easier to go deep with somebody that you don't have a vested interest in of having a relationship or moving forward with, because it's kind of like that one night stand energy, and that may sound dirty or whatever, but you don't give a flying frick if you show all your body, your wrinkles, your whatever you're worried about, because you're just there to have a deep, fun experience, and you're going to throw it all away afterwards. But imagine if everything was like that in life, that you did that with all the people and you didn't really give a shit about what they thought about you or whatever. You were in it for you. And if they came and participated, it was as much for them as it was for you. And nobody's left wanting or whatever, because you just gave in that moment. And you're just like, holy shit, that was fun. And that was depth. And that was being of service in the moment, and loving and respecting and all this kind of stuff. And I learned about myself in your sharing, and you obviously got a beautiful experience as well. So whew, why don't we keep that in our life?
A question that came up for me while you're describing how like it's easier to like do this with someone that you don't care about. Why is that? Like when it's someone that you feel like there's a higher stakes involved, that you kind of shut down?
You're coming up against every rule and bit of programming that you've ever had of how you are worthy and how you're going to interact and how that's going to be a marriage partner, and how you're going to build depth. And you don't want them to see your darkness because that might scare them away. I conjecture exactly the opposite, that you lead with your darkness and the things you don't like. And if they're still there after you've said it, that's a person that I want to go to hell with. And in the hell is literally me of my darkness. And they're going to sit there and listen to me. And they're not going to say, holy freaking shit, this is scaring me, and that's got a demon in them. No, there's no demon. It's everybody's got some level of a darkness. It's just how much you're willing to let out at once. That anger, that fear, that sadness, or whatever. And everybody's fundamentally good. They just get lost sometimes along the way.
Of course. Yeah, that was brilliant. And like also to quickly backtrack, talking about like sex magic, where like you could kind of invoke an intention, cast an intention, and as you are about to climax, you can harness more of that energy and breathe through it and actually like create like a sex magic or manifestation or whatever. Could you talk about that quickly?
Absolutely. So have you heard of what Kundalini is in the body? Okay, so Kundalini in the tantric or whatever Indian representation is, it's like two snakes that are in the pelvis of your body. And it's also synonymous with your sexual energy and arousal and all this kind of stuff. So basically, in those traditions, there's a way to activate your Kundalini, which is part of your sexual arousal. As you get the tingles in your genitals or whatever, you can start to pull that Kundalini energy up. So what they call fire breath is you can squeeze your root chakra or your Kegels or whatever. If you're feeling that tingle in your genitals, you basically squeeze the root chakra and then you pull that energy up. And now all of a sudden that energy is not just in your root chakra or your sexual, your genitals. And you just keep, as that energy starts to grow in you, you pull these snakes literally up, this white and black snake, and they cross at each chakra. And basically you keep pulling it up and you keep pulling it up. This can be shared with a partner. Women, just in the way women are designed, they're more able to move that energy easily. And if you're with a partner, you can actually pull both energies up for each I don't know if you've heard of things like microcosmic orbits. So in sexuality, when a man penetrates, he's breathing out and his energy is coming out of his lingam into the woman's yoni. And then she's breathing in at the same time he's bringing out. And then when she's breathing out, he's breathing in and it's coming out through her heart. And you create this circle. And that sex energy starts to pulse through them and it rises exponentially. This is also Kundalini energy. So you're now starting to bring that up and up and up and up and up your body. And when you get into, there's things like the Temple of Isis and other things that used to be back in Jesus's time, and they teach all these things. But there's actually an activation that can happen. So when the snakes come up and they get into your head, they build a chalice. Like think of two snakes like this, a chalice around your pineal gland. And basically at the point of orgasm or sexual release, which is sex magic, you can command those two, and both partners can do it. They can command drops to be released that alchemize with the pineal gland. And you get this massive explosion of sexual energy. Now, our sexual energy is the ability to create. So when a man and a woman come together and sperm and egg and all this kind of stuff come together, a massive, huge energetic reaction can happen and a child is created. So a consciousness is pulled out of space and time and fused into flesh inside the woman's body, in her womb. So if you can start setting intentions with your energy. So most people, when they have their sexual energy, they just spray it around the room as part of the orgasm, and really you're not creating any intention for it. But if you're now having a loving embrace with a partner and you're trying to create something and you're pulling together all the magnetic and the electrical energies and the juices of sexuality all come together to create this alchemy. And it can make, like, alchemy is how they turned lead into gold, right? They added something to it, some energy, and they turned a base metal into a precious base metal. You are fully capable of that all the time as a human being, each man, each woman. And when you get to the sacredness level with each woman and man in that penetration and the sexuality, right now we're so lost in friction and orgasm and how do we look and all the stuff that porn teaches us, where instead now it's like looking in the eyes and it's coursing that energy through, and you're creating now these magnetic things. At the same time, we have the ability to have an alchemical reaction where it's like in that orgasm, you both hold space for each other and you create this cauldron and everybody breaks into like a base metal. You go completely liquid and you bubble and boil in that point of release. And then afterwards you cool down and there's this layer of black dross, which is our old traumas and all this stuff that no longer serves. And somebody just taps us with a hammer and that all breaks off. And now we're like 99.85% pure. And next time it'll be 99.9 or whatever, because you can't clean all that stuff all at once. And that's what the sexual male and female connection is. We've got it into marriage and serving each other and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if you know this, but you know who Mary Magdalene was, right? In the Bible. They called her a prostitute. Well, she wasn't actually a prostitute. She was an initiate in the Temple of Isis. She came to Jesus's life to initiate him into the sacred practices of sacred sexuality. And I grew up Catholic, and this resonates with me completely. She changed him so that he could get to the point that when he went on the cross, he could come out of body and then come back to his body 3 days later or whatever it was. Well, did you also know, remember the Virgin Mary? She created a child in her womb without ever having sex. Well, most people won't tell you this, but the Virgin Mary was Mother Mary, who was a high priestess in the Temple of Isis. And so Jesus was created God energy, whether you believe in God or source energy or whatever, to be something as a symbol for this world. And they don't also talk that the first 20 years of Jesus' life, he wandered all over the world and he got trained in all these deep practices. And when he came to the point, he could transcend pain and transcend all these things to be able to be the symbol. So the most base energy and the magic that you have has been suppressed from you because the church and everybody, did you know for 2,000 years, you couldn't touch yourself with the church. Your wife could turn you in and get you stoned to death if you gave yourself pleasure. Sex was only to make babies. Guess what? When you make babies, then you got 10 babies. How many times did you have sex? Maybe 20 or 30 times along the way, because nobody knew how to control those energies.
Yeah, and there's been such like historical shame about the body since like the dawn. Like at least even like going back to the Victorian era, like they constricted the body. Like women had to wear corsets, they couldn't show their ankles, they had to wear white most of the time. Like it was crazy. Like that was going on even then because they probably knew like we can't have these people messing around with their bodies. It's got to be shame, 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 shame.
But at the same time, in Victorian era, do you know what hysteria is?
Yes. Was it something about like women? It was like directed to women. Was it about their period when they had PMS or something?
Women that didn't have enough sexuality were eventually had a whole bunch of body symptoms and energy symptoms, and they were told that they were hysterical, and they'd get hysterical on their husband, and this hysteria would come, and they would be prescribed by their doctor to go to a doctor, and they'd lift their skirt up, and a male doctor would give them an orgasm as a remedy for hysteria. That's why the vibrator was created and all this kind of stuff. This is back in the 1800s.
Wow.
And then also look, do you know what nannies are, right? In Victorian times. So a nanny looked after the male children or the children of the house.
Hmm.
They were taught very staunchly to monitor the boy's bed for wet dreams and any signs of sexuality. So she was constantly checking, and they devised these really horrible punishments if they were ever caught touching themselves or because it was so impure. So they would create this trauma into this child, like they get spanked or they'd be humiliated or any other thing. And some of these nannies got really good at it. You can go do a big long research about it, but that was part of the sexual shame
Yeah.
that was propagated down to everybody else.
Yeah. And then like even growing up in like modern day, it was like even shame like, oh, you'll get hairy arms if a guy masturbates, like all of that stuff. So it was even carried on today. And like I want to hear your thoughts. We kind of briefly spoke about this, like about like pornography, and that's been like the main consumption, and like the way that men see it, it's just completely skewed their perception of what it is. You like said it so beautifully last time where you're like, yeah, like most people think that sex is just a girl bending over on the sink and then like 20 minutes, pow, pow, and it's done.
Mm-hmm. Pretty sad, right?
Yeah.
We have images. I mixed about porn because there's different types of porn that are coming out now that are much more
Yeah.
loving and more companies like Sex Art and others where they're creating an image where it's very balanced and it's very loving and it's building for both and that kind of stuff. But other side, there's like the pizza delivery guy comes to the door and there's a hole in the pizza box and oh, they really love that. And well, no freaking wonder people are doing these crazy things in the world, and then it's shaming and traumatizing people because they're seeing it on TV, so that must be okay or that must be normal. This is what women want, because we as men aren't really told what women want. We got to kind of figure it out in this roundabout way. But yeah, so you can see it in pornography, right? Like women that they constantly got to spit on their genitals and all this kind of stuff because somebody's obviously not enjoying themselves. There's a lot of trauma inside.
Yeah.
There's no moisture coming from both parties, and so you get these people that are having screaming orgasms or whatever that do not appear to be having pleasure because their body's not even responding. So you can kind of look at it and see some of this stuff. But flip side, there's a lot of porn that I'm seeing come out now. I'm not an aficionado, but it's like where there's a purity of the energy, right? Because otherwise, if you're faking an orgasm on a film and I'm watching that as a man, I get really confused on what's arousal in a woman from what I'm seeing on there. She's pretending and making all these noises and stuff like that, but there's other porn that you can watch and it's like, holy shit, she's fully involved in this, and the eyeballs are going back and body's arching and shivering and shaking. So they're I'm not saying porn's bad anymore. I'm saying that there's like this renaissance coming now where some of the truth of real orgasmic bliss and all this stuff is starting to be shown. And if we could kind of section it off, one's controlling and another one's freeing.
Yes.
Um, when you're trying to get back into your body and touch yourself, and men have been told that they're too sexual and stuff like that, but men are bred to propagate. We're bred to spread our seeds so that the human race continues, and women judge us as okay, well, we're not in control of ourselves and all this kind of stuff. But as we talked the other day, a little boy in his 15s all of a sudden wakes up one day and a lot of women don't want to touch him and hug him anymore, and nobody really talks about it, but now you're hairy and your voice is dropped and maybe you have a bulge in your pants or whatever, and the uncomfortableness just grows, and the man doesn't often know why. And I'm not saying have sympathy for us or whatever, just understand that that is a kind of a shame moment that's created, but nobody really knows why. And then the mother's, I can jump on mom or touch her anywhere in the body, all of a sudden becomes, no, I can't. And we're not told why. So then we proceed into dating in high school and all this kind of stuff and all these weird rules because the women have their own uncertainties about stuff. And we're also taught to lead people on and just see if they really are interested in us, and we lie with our energies and this kind of stuff. I'll just say that a lot of men, until they get traumatized by trying over and over again, are just trying to please. They're just trying to figure out a way in to get that touch back and that intimacy back, and they don't know why. And they'd really love a woman to be honest sometimes, rather than say, get away from me, or you being too sexual or whatever. Just say, hey, if you did it this way or you tried this or whatever, that can be a beautiful moment of learning and nurturing. And I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be a better lover. I'm going to be a better date for the rest of my life. But our mom doesn't teach us that. School doesn't teach us that. Where do we go other than porn, which we just talked about, to find that? And then a lot of rapes and other things. And I'm not condoning the men, but speaking from my experience, they were confused and they were lost, and they were just looking for somebody to show them the way. And it's not good, and we need to support men as men kind of thing in all that kind of stuff, and start standing in our power and being more part of the choice of what we want. Because at least from my experience, sometimes it's like just trying to please and prove yourself, and you're just like this puppy and trying to be friends and accepting it, but it sometimes never goes anywhere. It's just like, oh, it's a detente and it feels really comfortable, but men suffer from lack and they have urges and needs and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, they'll offer sex on the first date and all that kind of stuff. That's mainly a thing from lack, and there's a lot of people coming from it. I just ask that we don't judge each other because of that. Women can probably get sex whenever they want, whether it's with a person that they want, because there's a lot of men asking, but that's not the same for men. As a man, speaking perspective. So sorry, I talked a lot.
No, that was beautiful. No, don't even apologize. No, but, and I think we also talked about how, like, you know, from the female perspective, like, even women are still in their trauma. They are in their sexual shame. And so they don't even feel safe to vocalize what feels good for them, because maybe they don't even know. Maybe they haven't even explored that terrain on their own. So it's like, how can they say it when they don't even know? And so it's just like two people confused, and then they're like, all right, let's get it over with. Let's get it done.
Well, like I said in a live a little while ago, who's deciding whether you have sex or not? And if you sit in that moment and you look at it, it's like, oh, why is my mom in my head? Or why is my girlfriend's in my head? I hardly know this guy. Am I going to be called a slut afterwards? Am I going to be out of wedlock having sex or all these things? And then the traumas of the past boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever are coming up. And it's like, oh, if I let them in too early, then they run away or whatever. And next, we're not even having conversations about what we want sexually. Like, it's like, if you could come in and as a man say, hey, I'm a little sexually frustrated. I had a divorce a few years ago, and I'd really like to find someone that's really important to me, to have somebody that sex is important with, instead of waiting until the wedding night and starting to decide or whatever, where that conversation wasn't had. Wouldn't you really want to have a conversation and say, this is what's really important to me, and I'd really love that. Is that something you really love too? And it's like, oh, my last boyfriend was like that and he didn't respect me. But at least you could now have a conversation and get a little vulnerable, so that the person you let into your life is aware of all your needs and wants. And then it's not this big confusion later. And then it's like, I didn't tell you this thing, but you're forcing me to try and do it. And then the relationship's breaking down because you never had a conversation, and there was a story based on a whole bunch of little bits that you distilled out of something that didn't even be part of it.
Yeah.
And we're lost.
Yeah. And we're so so lost right now, and like that is just happening on a global scale, and like that it makes sense why everyone is so single right now, or just like keeping to themselves, like. And but I think that there's like a divine plan with all of this, because I feel like with everyone in separation, especially right now with the quarantine and pandemic going on, like I really do feel like it will bring some light to some things like what we're discussing, and I think there will be another love revolution in the making.
But that is the responsibility of each of us,
Yes.
because we've really come up to say, I really like intimacy, or I like sexuality, or I like to talk, and that's an important thing in my life, and I don't have it now because I can't date and I can't whatever. And it's really coming back down, and once you start to understand that that's going to be the most healing thing that you're going to be able to welcome into your life after this. If we had a world full of people that were going based on their heart and their desire in the moment and following through with it and not worrying about shame and guilt and all this kind of stuff. We're talking about med beds coming in, so do you really even have to worry about things like STDs and all this kind of stuff? This is all going to be healed. They're all part of disease and other stuff. But if we could get into that point coming out of all this COVID stuff to say, my sexuality is important to me, finding my innocence and purity is important to me, and that's going to come by releasing all my traumas as rapidly as possible. And it's not through talking it out and having really deep whatever. It's about connecting with other people and exploring with other people. If we're divine beings that are having multiple experiences to try and define ourselves and learn experiences and all that kind of stuff, we're experimenting and we're finding out what we love. Can you really ask your twin flame to come into your divine partner or whatever if you do not really define to the universe all the things that are important? And if you've only had one or two lovers in your life because that's what the universe said, have you really found your groove? Have you really found that thing? And I'm not saying you just sleep with anybody. No, you find really solid people that come into your life, and you share at that level, and then you start to understand, okay, I really love that, and this is amazing, and this is whatever. But we're not waiting for 3 or 4 years trying to change that person and figure them out to say, okay, well, we shouldn't have got married or whatever. No, it's about going in and really understanding ourselves and finding ourselves with other people that are wanting to do the same. And if you get people that are deep and willing to share in all the trauma and the goods and the bads, you're going to work all that stuff out, and then you're going to go into a divine relationship with that person, because it's like, holy shit, look at this. Right?
Yeah.
But we're being forced to decide beforehand, which isn't really the way it was ever meant to be. It's just the control mechanism that come. Marriage hasn't been around for that long in the way it is now, where it's property and houses and all this kind of shit. It's maybe a couple 100 years. There was other versions way back when where it was like you had to come together just to live, and family lineages and stuff. So it's been twisted in a lot of ways. And anyways, that's a more controversial topic. And some women, it's like they want the one and all that kind of stuff. I still haven't understood where that is. I just, as a man, that comes in time by exploring a little bit, and we do a lot of it in college and in high school, all that kind of stuff. And I just see it simpler, and it's not, well, we're taught a fairy tale and all this kind of stuff, and we don't know what's our confusion and what's really our draw. So I leave it open for everyone, but we have to get past the fairy tale before we can start to really choose for ourselves. I lived the fairy tale. I got the marriage and the good job and the house and the 3 kids and all this kind of stuff. And then you get to the end, you find out it's death and taxes, and you were just on a treadmill. But when you're starting to choose for you, it becomes something very different and more beautiful.
Yeah, no, I wanted, well, quickly to talk about the fairy tale thing for women, and speaking from that, like, we are a victim of Disney programming, of bad romances seen on television as glamorous, like even Pretty Woman. Like, come on, like, seeing that, like, you can't tell me like that, like, women aren't going to be programmed after that. And like, even up to like in the 2000s with Sex and the City, Carrie Bradshaw, like, all of that just came sunken in, and it's like, what if this is the one? What if this is the one? And like, as women, I think we're more future planners, and guys are more in the moment of the journey. But like, women can't rest until they have that result, that title, that security. But that security is just made on stones and like bad foundation and just sand. And it's like, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd love to do another live on unconditional love, or maybe I can host.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
can that, because unconditional love will get you to the same path, but all the rules that we programmed in between is the thing that actually destroy our ability to have a
Yep.
deep and loving relationship. Until we get to that and understand that people are having affairs anyways, they're going to pursue energies that they feel anyways, whether you've fully committed and you're in marriage, but now they're an excuse to completely destroy it because there's no way to have discussions about that stuff, or explore your fears about the relationship, or to be vulnerable and say, this isn't feeling right, or why aren't you giving me sex, or why isn't this happening, or whatever. But nobody will ever talk about it, because did we really get to the deepest intimate depth of that relationship? I don't think so.
No. No, and I think what you've done is so brave, like just finally choosing yourself and like being courageous enough to promote self-love and exploring this unknown path versus just pretending to be in a box that, you know, is the American dream. You were living the American dream, but like you were miserable, like
Yep.
and to hear that as like a 30-something-year-old woman who's single and like still on that journey, and to hear that, it's just so refreshing, because it like takes so much pressure off of me from seeing this from family members, from programming, etc.
I understand. I waited until 30 before I got married. I was literally, you want to talk really vulnerable? I was a virgin until I was 30 years old, because I was so confused by women and all these kind of things. And then you're kind of like, the minute you get to the point of having sexuality with a woman, you're on this escalator and it's not even talked about. And nobody, oh, well, I let you in and now we're going to get a ring and we're going to move in together, and all this kind of stuff. Can you imagine, as women, how many men did you have first sexuality with and then they didn't come back, and then you judged yourself? No, they ran away from the escalator, not from you as a woman, because they hadn't had enough discussion to be able to understand whether or not the full compatibility was there. So how many stories have went on that women gave away themselves and this man wasn't? No, there wasn't enough vulnerability or intimacy that they should have been sharing that deeply first before. Because I'll tell you, a man that hasn't had sexuality for a while and his first sexuality, he's going to be full of like shames and traumas and all these other things bubbling up out of his body, that really the first sexuality, how clumsy is it a lot of times, how
Yeah.
shameful are off, when really you don't really know a person until maybe it's 3 times or whatever. And I'm not saying this is what we got to do so men get more sex. No, I'm saying you haven't really got to the depths where you're letting your guards down and you're starting to really explore it for yourself until maybe 3 times, because you're trying to meet the porn image the first time and you're trying to please her and make sure she has her orgasm and not have yours too early, or judging you about your body or length of your penis, or whatever. It's sad that all these things happen, but it's all because we're bubbling this shame and this like self-judgment at the same time we're trying to have pleasure. But if instead you sit in a circle with that person and you say, okay, well, what are the outcomes that we're looking for? And it's not orgasm based, and what does your body like and what does my body like? All of a sudden that sexuality becomes something a little more sacred and a little more communicated about, and then something magical can happen, because now you're into that depth and you're okay, we're going to have a closing circle afterwards of the sexuality, and I'm going to release you so I'm not tangled up with your energy. I hear a lot of women are worried about the man's just expelling all this dirty grumpy stuff into the woman, and then she's feeling like shit afterwards. No, sit in a circle, look in each other's eyes and say, I release you and I love you, so that we can again engage, and you're not carrying any of my shit and I'm not carrying any of your shit. That's what sexuality needs to be. Who teaches us that? No, you don't have that as a marriage partners. You don't. Did you know that laying in the same bed all the time, you remember how maybe your parents did it, they complete each other's sentences after a while because their energy merges so much. In Tantra, they actually say you should only come together about 3 times a week. You should sleep in separate beds, because then you can process the shit that showed up for the last week, and your partner's not nudging you and bumping you and stuff. And it has nothing to do with whether you have a good marriage. If anything, I think it would make a better
I
marriage,
agree.
because you get to be yourself. Even living in independence. What's the rush? Now we're in our 30s or 40s or 50s. I've got a house and she's got a house. What's the big rush to couple together and say we got to live in the same house and do that in the first 6 months or whatever? No, spend lots of time sleepovers or whatever, where you're starting to really get to know, but you're not taking the other person's independence away. They're learning about you, asking the hard questions, having the fights, and then coming back from a clean space. Like, that's a new world that I want to see happen. And it's not breaking down the family. You can be one in one end of the house and one in the other end of the house. Even in my divorce, it was all about sexuality and some shame and guilt that she had as a child and some sexual abuse, but I couldn't change her. So all of a sudden it's like I have to give up everything, my house and my kids and everything. What I should have done, and I look at now, is either negotiated or moved into another room in the house and just made it okay that, okay, we're separated, but we don't have to be married to have sexuality with other people, as long as you're physically aware that you're having it. How many marriages do you know that the man's not sexually pleased or the woman's not sexually pleased because they have a trauma? Can you imagine joining two families? This would blow some people's minds out, that they don't have to leave their marriages. You just find a man that's not sexually satisfied and a woman and make an agreement, and all of a sudden you got a modular four family.
Yeah.
It's and the kids don't get hurt and you're still living in the same house and you don't have to give up all your security. It happens all the time where you have siblings that aren't even part of the same family nowadays too. So it's the new level of modular family, or we get these communities together where everybody lives in a larger space and everybody fills their role. Husband and wife doesn't have to fit in that same way anymore. It's different. Some people will say I'm breaking down the modular family, but it's not. It's happening whether we like it or not, in just really shameful, smashing kind of ways, when we just really acknowledge it. People are having 6 husbands or wives over the course of their life. It's people are exploring whether they like it, but they got to lose their house and divide their assets and mess up their kids every time.
Yeah, because the divorce lawyers said so, and that's how they make money.
Well, and your parents look badly upon you because you got divorced, and how could you break up the family? And it just creates this ball of shame, and it doesn't have to.
And no one talks about, like, even like the family, the kids, the parents, like no one just talks about it. Everyone pretends like it's normal. They just try to numb themselves, get distracted. No one talks about it. It's dysfunction.
Well, and literally, because I was the one that chose the divorce, I had to lose all the friends, because I'll tell you right now, the women that had worries about their men maybe potentially leaving or getting a thought from mine or whatever, that terrified them. It wasn't because I wasn't worthy of talking with them. It just forced them to look at that energy of that breakup and why did it happen and how did it have to happen this way. It wasn't a truth. It was just the societal shame. We're at a 60% divorce rate. Is marriage working? No. Let's look at something else. Let's look at different ways where we can be accountable, and we got to look after our children. You create a child, it is right. And my ex has a boyfriend and he's part of my family now, and I love that my kids have a second dad. That if it happened to me, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no jealousy or shame. It's just beautiful. It's a new way. So
and with the pandemic and everyone kind of stuck to examine their actual living quarters and their partner, and they can't go anywhere, they're really faced with the truth. And with this pandemic, the divorce rate has skyrocketed because people are like, I actually fucking hate this person.
They'd had to really look at it. They weren't busy and running away from it. They had to look at the energies, right? So, getting some water.
No, that's fine. That's great. Hydrate. And I'm just glad to just be able to talk about this with someone who's like on the other spectrum of this whole love game, and to just feel better, because I feel the pressure even from parents or family members. Like, I gotta rush, like TikTok, my biological clock.
Don't worry about that. You got lots of time. I had 3 kids after marrying a woman at 30, so it doesn't happen, and it's really a choice in your body.
Yeah.
You know, if you believe everybody that it's going to run out and that clock only has so many eggs, and don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, but
it's just refreshing because it's like we're all racing to this finish line. What is the rush? Like, I understand it, but what is the rush?
Well, if you go back 2 generations, what was the time to live for a lot? It was like in their 40s maybe, and to wait until your 30s, you were kind of playing the clock, right? But now women live up into their 80s and men into their late 70s. So really that pressure isn't the same. And really until you've found yourself, like how many get to 40 and they have a midlife crisis and then they have a divorce and everything falls apart and all this kind of stuff. You're just pushing out that time. I think people that are kind of older souls, and we talked about this, and we're a bit older souls, we're waiting for the primeness of a person. And I now know that I married my wife for the 3 amazing children that I have. And it taught me a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. So there was no rush, but to really be aware of yourself, and some of that doesn't come until much later in life, right? You're 20 years before this, all taught you things and screwed you up and made you better and all this kind of stuff. But I don't think we're ever really ready, but it's just more of an awareness, and then finding a partner that you can kind of go to the mat with on all the things that show up and be really deep and vulnerable with them. As I open more, that's key. Like, why would I want to lie to you? Why would I not want to be anybody else unless I wanted some other agenda? And I could care less, but I want people in my life that I surround myself with that have the same depth. And then I think that creates a light. Like, even this conversation is going to draw people in and they're going to want to be part of that community. And I really think we're here to create new community just by our vulnerability and honestness. And some people are going to say, oh, we were talking about sexuality and having pleasure and all this kind of stuff. Some people aren't going to be ready, but other people are going to be like, fuck, I've been in this cocoon for the last year and whatever with my spouse and it's not working out. And I really want to explore and expand and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to tell you, to heal your traumas, you need sexuality. If you can't get that with the partners that you're having, you're going to have some hard discussions and start to make those other possibilities. And there's nothing shameful if your partner doesn't want to have sex with you. Do you have to break your marriage up? Well, some people are going to say, evil, I'm bad, or whatever. Well, I'm not. They're doing it anyways, and they're getting fucked in the process with all the shame and stuff. So now create spaces where you can start to negotiate that stuff and ask for it. Make sure it's clear with your partners. And then you don't have to destroy your family and all this kind of stuff. It's a new modular type of family that has people talk about all this shit that shows up rather than hiding it or having an affair or whatever. Everybody feels the energy. The minute it happens, you've let the cat out of the bag already, whether you hide it for a year or not. Nobody wins.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting really crystal clear of what you need, what your wants are, what your desires are. That may mean a divorce. That may mean walking away from people or whatever. And that's the full and beautiful outcome of all this mask that's been put over all of us. It's also put us into a cocoon, and it's forcing us to choose ourselves. And hopefully these seeds will go into people and they'll say, that's what I want. I can feel that confidence of both of those people, and they got something figured out. Now I just got to go from A to B to get to that same, or join us in community and let's talk and let's create spaces where we can have all this stuff. And then everybody will come and we'll build a new society. And here's the rules of how that works. And how do you have here's a contract that you're going to sign with your partner to say, I'm going to explore, but I have to come back and I got to talk to you about it and share the experience so that you're not feeling left out or that they're better or whatever. Because 9 times out of 10, the grass is not always greener. But if you let that energy process the way it needs to, you're now going to feel fuller about yourself and explore this beautiful thing. What we talked about, I don't know if we talked about it, but imagine, let's say we were in relationship and in marriage, and I have all these marriage vows. One day at work, this beautiful young girl comes up and she's just perky and wants to have sex with me, just asks for me straight out. And I'm this like older man, and I'm like, oh wow, women are seeing me in this way, and it's getting me all excited. But I make a decision and say, I'm going to honor my marriage contract with you. I never talked to you about it. The energy shifted because now you owe me because I gave up this thing.
Yeah.
You may feel the energy happen because she made the proposition, so you think I've had an affair, where I just sit there and it's like, okay, I gave it up because I loved you, didn't know how to talk about it. Instead, what if I came home and I said, holy shit, this thing just happened at work, it's got me all excited, I don't know how to explain it, but this young woman wants it. And is there a way that I can negotiate with that where that would make you feel okay? And holy shit, it's going to challenge you on all the shit and all the jealousies and all that kind of stuff. But at least now you're aware of what's in play.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm not stuck. And what if you could say, okay, well, just get an STD test and I want to hear everything about it afterwards, and that's what's required, and don't do this or don't do that. At least now I've got a way to explore it. And then I go and explore it. She has some techniques that are a little bit different. I bring some new techniques home for the marriage bed. At the same time, I'm sharing it all with you. And it's like, holy shit, it was okay, but she was just kind of boring, and she had this thing or whatever. And then afterwards, you're like, okay, feeling good about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
that the energy's now passed. I've got that thing out of my system or whatever. And I came back and I brought some more stuff
Mm-hmm.
into that. But now I have to let you do that same thing if that shows up in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden, that strength of that relationship is 1,000% more, because I'm telling you stuff that might be edgy, but at least I'm honoring myself and loving myself by
Mm-hmm.
saying it. That doesn't force you to expect it, respect it, or do it. It's huge, and it's very different, and it comes up against a million different things. But in the end, the honesty and the truth is what will get you through everything and make a marriage and a relationship stronger.
Yeah. It's like, it seems like the conversation you just had, it's like a conversation I would have with my best friend, you know, and where anything is permissible.
Yep.
But the title husband and wife, it shifts that, and it creates a certain expectation, a certain possession, a certain codependence.
Yep. Keep going.
No, that was it.
But look at how the rules have forced. Isn't your husband or your whatever supposed to be your best friend?
Yes.
Why are you not friends? Where's all the obligation, expectations, rules, shit, all that shit getting under your skin, and now creating this expectation that you're going to be, you don't want me to have friends at work that are women or whatever because they make you feel uncomfortable, or if I flirt or talk to the waitress, now all of a sudden I'm in trouble just for being my open sexual self. But we never have a conversation about that, or it bubbles up later.
Yeah.
Because we never really said what the requirements of marriage were. It doesn't say it on your marriage certificate. It doesn't say, there's a whole written book. Your understanding of marriage will be based upon your parents' relationship in marriage, and the people around you, your community, your church, all your religious upbringing will tell you one thing. But I'm not Jewish, but let's say I was Jewish and you were Muslim or something. The requirement of marriage is going to be completely different in Muslim than Jewish. And did we ever really have a conversation of do they mean the same thing? We got into dating and the escalator happened because we both agreed. But when you don't agree, how do you have that hard conversation and say, I'm not feeling it. I enjoyed our time, but I really don't want to marry you right now. Is that something that a man's going to safely have a conversation with a woman on? No, he's going to walk away and ghost you or whatever, because there is no allowed way to have that conversation. Yeah. It's like, that was amazing. I'd like to have more sexuality with you, and so we could explore it, but it was a little clumsy the first time or whatever. But instead, I'm judging you on a first interaction and deciding whether I come back afterwards based on something that was clumsy and messy, that's normally clumsy and messy.
And it's not discussed, so it's just bubbling on the surface because you're not addressing it.
And how many have self-judged, and men go away with complexes and women go away with complexes, that they're used too easily and they open their legs too easy and all this kind of stuff, when really that what we've taken away isn't really even true, because the thing wasn't even discussed. It was like, oh, I was scared that we were on the escalator and I'm not ready to make a commitment yet. That sexuality was amazing. But to make that big of a life decision just with one interaction with a person, or does that change if you've gone on 10 dates and we've talked and you've met the parents and all that kind of stuff? And to do that, to protect themselves, it's like, okay, when's the time I'm going to allow them in or whatever? No, what really needs to happen is a conversation about where's sexuality important, and do you want that? And and make a deal that at the end of the sexuality, you talk about it. And if it's clumsy or whatever, how are we going to learn about ourselves, our techniques, and expand or whatever, unless really honest people come into our life with no judgment? It's like, oh, wow, you didn't moan enough, or you didn't move enough, or you didn't listen to my directions, or whatever. But that never happens, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not a discussion. That's not normal. That's not typical.
Yeah.
And we're all just missing out on having a whole bunch of communication. Can you imagine going in and having a sexual partner come back and give you really good feedback about your technique and all that kind of stuff? How many times does that ever happen? Zero.
It might have been like, oh, that felt good. That's
You
about
want to
it.
make them feel good. You want to please them. You're worried that they might think wrong of you or get angry or whatever. What if it was just like, okay, for the first 3 times of sex, you're going to have a kind of scoring, or not even scoring, but just a deep discussion about, I prefer it this way. Yeah, I think I told you the other day, it's like in sex, we go by the moans of the other person, the sounds that they're making, right? And if you think it's like, oh, that feels good on my body, it takes a quarter of a second to get to my brain. I got to make the words into it. I got to speak it out of my lips. We're like 3 seconds before it's into your brain, and now your body's saying, okay, he likes this thing. Well, that was 3 seconds ago, but your body's doing the thing that's right now. So we really are completely out of sync just because we won't have a conversation. It's like, oh, that was way better when you did it over here. Try this and whatever. But no, you can't talk during sex because that makes it feel uncomfortable. But how many people are upset and unfulfilled because they didn't communicate?
Yes. Yes, totally. A lot.
A lot. So with a few simple little guidelines or pointers, I'd love to put a course if we could find the people together, but to talk about some of this stuff. What's a contract to go in for sexuality, and how do you handle all the different clumsinesses and that kind of stuff that are part of sexuality? How do you get to negotiate sexuality? How do you say what you want? How do I give you permission to be completely unbridled rather than holding back because you're scared that wildness or whatever might look uncomfortable to me or whatever? And can I comment on it or whatever? Or do you want me to be my feminine this time and you be more masculine?
Yeah.
Because we're trying to just please, and we're not sure what you want. But if it was safe to ask a few questions and say, do you like it hard and fast? Do you like it whatever? Because some people, that'll hit their trauma and they will be just like triggered because that's how their rape or something was. But they're begging for it. They want that biker guy and they want that kind of don't give a damn or whatever. Well, can I turn that on for 15 minutes while we're in bed rather than kind of trying to feel around and see if it's okay or safe or whatever? Nobody asked. Everybody lost.
And it sucks. And then you're just like, all right, cool. And then you just on to the next thing, on to the next distraction.
And you get bored very quickly because they never really figured out what you want, but it was all about mind reading.
Yeah. While we were talking on the phone, you were able to sift out some of my traumas. We were talking, you were like, did you have like daddy issues? And I was like, yes. And you were like, did you please, like, were you like pleasing your father all the time? And I was just like, yes. I thought that was very interesting. And like, I reflected upon our conversation after that. And like, I saw more of that pattern come up for me. And like, I was just like, wow, like I was really pleasing my dad. And that translated into this dysfunctional pattern in these partnerships that I had.
So now explain what you were doing to your partners in trying to please your dad, because that was the symbol, right?
Yeah, I was just trying to make them happy.
And you didn't know. And then you were making them happy and they were taking the pleasure, but you were getting none of your own because you had no expectation of it, because you were waiting to be validated, to get that pat on the head and say, hey, you did really good, Anya, or whatever. But no, you want them to give you a screaming orgasm or whatever, or take you or whatever. But you got to give that permission. You got to give that and have that expectation going in. Now, you asked, how did I know this? So we all have this power, and I was going to talk to you about that later or whatever, but what I call a hollow bone. It's a shamanic term. So a bird would have hollow bones and so they'd use a bird's bone in a ceremony, and they might blow smoke through it or some kind of medicine onto you. But it's also an act of being in service to all those around you. So as we grow and ascend, you do it too, where you're giving just openly. You're doing singing bowls and talking to people because you just know, and there's a feeling that it's needed. So in that, I wasn't interpreting or judging or telling you what was good or bad. I was just being a hollow bone. And it was like you came up and gave this really vulnerable thing, and that higher self part of you knew that the hollow bone was standing there, and I just basically gave you the words that you needed. And it wasn't reading your mind, and it wasn't ESP on everything that Anya's ever done or whatever. It was like that was the words that nobody's ever had the courage to say to you, that just struck you right in your heart and smashed you open in that second. And it wasn't for me, it was to give that example to others of what's possible, and then allow others to do the same for us. And you're a part of me, and I'm a part of you, and we just up in this circle of service.
Yeah.
And once we get money out of the picture in this world, healing will be just something we do because we care for someone and we love them, and we see that depth, and we see them hurting themselves, and we just want to offer something. And then we as healers have to figure out how to get out of our own ego and our own way. There's nothing in my benefit to tell you those things. So they just came through me. And rather than having to understand it, what is she going to think when I say this or whatever? Because I saw that moment of vulnerability in you. You said, I have something really vulnerable to ask. And then you asked that thing is, why does all this always happen from men? And all of a sudden you just popped out of your box and said, I'm going here because this is going to help me. And then the exact answer you needed came back.
Yeah.
And it was all because of you. It had nothing to do with me. I'm just open to allowing that in everything. Because it's as much for me as it is for you in the end, because I saw it from the daddy side or whatever too. And you can see that validation, push, pull, lack of love when our father's always working and they're never around, and you're really not getting that hugs and kisses and all that kind of stuff, because the universe and the way this world is stole it from us. And that happened with my dad. He was never around, and my mom was taking pills and different things for depression and all this kind of stuff. You didn't have parents in a lot of times in the way we wanted.
Right.
Nothing
Right.
wrong with me.
Yeah. We all go into this specific plane, knowing that no one can escape the any kind of trauma. Like we agree to come down here, we're going to get some trauma, can't escape it, and then we're going to disentangle ourselves from it.
Well, I'm in the process. Once I can get some more energy, I want to write a book. But think of trauma as strategically placed roadblocks along your path of life. You got this straight line ahead of you, and then there's this roadblock. It's a rape, or my mother died, or my sister died, or whatever. And those roadblocks veer you off to the right, and you become small or scared or angry. And then there's more roadblocks. And once you get into your 30s, 40s, or whatever, you're starting to understand why those roadblocks were there. You might have been a drug abuser. You might have been in complete depression, all those kind of things. But you got to your smallest, and you're completely angry at the world. And then eventually you have a choice. Every step is a choice. And the quickest way I see to get out of a lot of these roadblocks, because most of them are sexuality based and those kind of things, is to get people in touch with their sexuality again and their root and their tools. Because when you can start giving yourself pleasure, you can pull yourself out of depression in a 5 minutes by just touching yourself and having pleasure. And some people may think that's dirty. Well, fuck you, because it was taken from us, and we need to get okay with that again. And once we're owning our own genitals and what we want and our pleasure, we're not going to stand for lovers that don't meet us, and we're not going to have no conversation and wait around and expect that they're going to figure it out. No, you're going to be a wild ass lover that loves yourself, and in so doing does the same for them. And it might trigger the shit out of them, but that's the way to heal. Pleasure, love. Do you think God made us to be like this all the time, every day of the week? No, the healing path is through pleasure and sharing that with somebody else and having deep, vulnerable discussions that are scary as shit, And then the next time you go deeper and you go deeper, and then you find out that you're just shining because the vulnerability, all the stuff we hate is all in cages inside of us. And we're only a quarter or a half of a person because every single one of those traumas is locked off a piece of us being a vibrant, loving child. Once you understand that and you start sharing that with people, they let those parts of you out of the cage for you. And there's nothing bad.
No, it's all good. I after our last conversation with everything, like I was so activated. Like the next morning, like everything was just like 10 degrees brighter. I just felt okay. Like I guess the best way to describe it is, like, like the hot girls on Instagram, like the Instagram chicks, but they're like owning their sexuality. And I felt that way. I was like, oh my God, this was the missing link. And like, I was so grateful and thankful because I was like, finally, like I was able to access this thing that I just buried.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was over the phone. Like some of the other stuff we talked about, the healing and things like yoni massage work, or just being worshipped by another person that has no interest in having intercourse or those kind of things, and can see your whole body and massage out all those things, get you to a point of relaxation, and then start letting that stuff come out. And those are higher levels of the same process. But I can teach you any woman how to, what's a yoni egg, and how do you do self-pleasure practice and move the breath and even gauge the body just energetically through discussions and stuff like that. There's so many men that have those capabilities out there that are just waiting. There's so many women as well that we just have to get out of that shame. I've met a ton of women that I would call priestesses. They're young women, really empowered. They really want to step into this, and they're being shamed. It's like, I feel like I need to be sexual with this person, but I don't love them, or I don't want a relationship with them. Well, back 2,000 years ago, there was full temples with thousands of people that were involved in this. You as a soldier would come back with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and your prescription would be to go sit in a temple for 6 weeks. And these priestesses would come and do sacred sexual practices on your body to soothe it and clear it out and release all the traumas. And once you've released all the traumas, you don't go home and be violent and angry and hit our kids or overdose like our soldiers are doing, because they don't have any of these procedures. There's no way to clear out the trauma. So we just medicate it and we just throw them in the cage or whatever. This world is recoming. It's the churches and all these places have hidden all these practices, and all the practitioners and all the priestesses and priests and stuff are all lining up. They just don't have a place to collect yet. They don't have a place to congregate. And that's why I want to have these discussions, and people are going to resonate and they're going to talk and look me up and let's have more discussions. And sometime soon after COVID, we're going to have workshops and temples that people are going to gather at, and people that are ready and fully within their power are going to come and they'll ask for these things, and they will happen. And there's no shame in it. There's no prostitution or whatever that the world wants to put on these names. Remember, Mary Magdalene was called a prostitute 2,000 years later, but at that time she was a high priestess, and she did this and had power and strength because of it. But the people that wrote the Bible wanted to take that power away. They changed it.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with that.
I want to jump on one thing, and we also discussed like how we're kind of entering this higher timeline. I wanted you to share that for a second.
All I can tell you is what I feel. I feel like I'm coming out of this cocoon phase, and what I've wanted my whole entire life, I came with all these thoughts and this higher perspective of sexuality and wanting a higher level of relationship and all this kind of stuff. So I've had to come to the point to literally admit to myself now that I've been waiting and holding a higher standard for what I'm going to welcome into my life in dating, relationships. But I can tell you for sure that as soon as all this truth comes out around the control of what's all behind COVID, and there's massive amounts of truth that are going to have to show up, it's going to break everybody wide open for a little while, and people aren't going to know who to trust or what's going on. And then light workers that are standing in these new powers are going to step forth into their purpose, and they're going to start offering things like workshops or just discussions with people, or or they're going to shine brighter, and they're going to be drawn to have conversations with them. And I can say my whole life, I've pictured myself standing in stadiums and talking in front of thousands of people, talking about unconditional love as a replacement for marriage, for example, or whatever. It's not like, oh, unconditional love is your baby and looking in their eyes. No, unconditional love is welcoming people into your life all day long. And imagine the security you have if you have 5 people that you really, really trust and you consider partners in your life. If one leaves or one dies or whatever, are you completely shattered? No, you're hurt, and you keep going on because you've allowed more of your root, your seed, your tree to spread into the world and touch more and more lives, rather than just saying, okay, only one for the rest of my life. Male female interaction, that's sad. It's like you've not fulfilled yourself completely. So I see a world where money, like, I don't know how many people have reviewed things like Nasara Jasara, but there's a point where our financial system is so completely fucked right now that something new is going to come in, and it's going to balance everything, and it's going to reset all the debts, all the money, all this kind of stuff, because it's all based on control and illusion. And a lot of people were tricked into accepting things that weren't true. Look at how many businesses have been destroyed by COVID and that kind of stuff. Money's just mangled up. So once we reset all these things and everybody gets on balance, can you imagine if you had enough money to cover your rent and food and heating and your car, would you be doing the same job you're doing right now? Would you be chasing on the treadmill? Would you be hiding from a job because you can't stand the control and bosses that are asshole because they'll take your food out of your mouth because you got to listen to some asshole that's a control freak? But that's what we're forced into right now. And our safety is based on running on the treadmill, where what if our safety was an inherent human right, which it always has been, that's been taken from us, and now all of a sudden we sit in balance? Then can you imagine now you're going to have time to look at all this shit, your relationship shit, and all those things that have shown up over COVID, and you're going to be able to say, take a deep breath and say, holy shit, me now. And things change. It's huge. You were going to say something? Or?
No.
No,
Just zoning in.
But yeah, so that time is coming very quickly. And the awarenesses we've got in this time that we struggled and chased and banged into each other and all this kind of stuff are going to make us make very different choices. And I don't know how many people have noticed, and I call it in for you right now. After you've listened to all the stuff we talked about, how does this feel in your heart? Is it something that's mangled up and it's from me controlling or wanting to have sexuality in my life or whatever? No, it's about me wanting to build a playground of people around me that have similar views, that are of higher divine order, fifth dimensional, whatever you want to call them, that are more of pure love and unconditional love, and not about shames and guilts and choosing one and all this kind of stuff. It's about being real on yourself, choosing you every time, flowing where the energies are going, and then be really communicative with the people around so that there's a lot of trust and hope and faith, because this world is built on none of those things right now. It's about trashing those things and everybody looking out for themselves. And I don't want that. And I can't get that unless I share it with you and share it with everybody on this video. And if you resonate with it, it's like, holy shit, okay, I'm not wrong. Like, I'm still human. I perfection. And once I surround myself with a bunch of people, get a dozen people together and then start talking about it, and then it's going to be 1,000 people, and then it's going to be 10,000 people in 15 chapters across the US and then across the world, and everybody's going to be asking for this thing. It'll be the replacement for church in a lot of ways. It's a community of people that are holding each other in integrity and truth. There is no sin, there's just mistakes, and accounting for what you did, and having hard conversations with people, not crimes, not whatever. Because I'll tell you right now, behind everything that's called a crime and a broken law and all this kind of stuff is some energies of trauma that are unresolved. Stealing, rape, hurting somebody else. It's anger of your father, and you're killing somebody because they reminded you of it. Not one of those things are things that need to be punishable by locking you in a cage. They need to be discussed. A lot of people are going to disagree, and there's a lot of really evil criminals out there. But the minute all this underlying energy of control and shit disappears, a lot of that stuff is going to implode, and we're going to have a lot of crying people and a lot of people that really need to be heard. And that's where this comes in.
Beautiful. I don't feel free to say yes or no, but I know you also talked about some criticism and backlashes you received for your work. I don't.
Well, I'll speak about it.
I just wanted to give you the platform if you.
Sure. Well, this is old energy, and I'm not going to stand in it anymore. I think I've healed through a lot of it, but there's some stuff behind it. But for example, I became a sexual healer, or I figured out that I was a sexual healer about 2.5, 3 years ago. And when I started to step into it, there was people in the Tantra community where I'm located here in Western Canada that heard about what was going on, judged it without ever talking to me. And I shared probably the most loving experience I've ever had for a woman before. I spent probably 10 or 15 hours with her. She was broke, but she was badly wounded, and I felt very called to give that hollow bone that we were talking about to her, and we negotiated a healing session for her. And she had a lot of experience in the sex positive area and that kind of stuff, knew how to negotiate all these things, knew how to transit all of her discussions. There was no cost. I was not charging anything for that. I just felt called to do it. And we negotiated all this stuff. She wanted to do it in bondage, and which was really edgy stuff for me and scared the hell out of me, but I was willing to try. And I'm not going to state it in shame, because at the time I was shamed, but there was a part of me, and I still feel it, and a lot, maybe people may judge it, but sacred sexuality involves both sides. And when not both sides are involved, it loses something. So as part of our negotiation, and the agreement we had was that me having some small form of pleasure, and it wasn't sex, that was, we agreed what it was part of that exchange. So we got to the point, we reviewed everything just before it started, and I spent 3 hours with this woman going through like really massive, where she was like completely traumatized, even like kissing a part of her body, like a love handle. And each time I'd have to hold her in her terror of whatever happened to her. And am I that man? Did I do this thing? And blah, blah, blah. And we went back, and the 9th time she giggled. It was like on that love handle, and then we did the other love handle, and we proceeded through the body and spent 3 hours just holding and absolute trust and all this kind of stuff. And it was all about her in the session. And then we got to the very end, and I was holding her, and it was very loving and beautiful. And she touched my genitals as part of the holding her. And I realized at that point, we hadn't done any of the pleasure part of mine. And I said, I'd really love what we talked about to be in this. And she orated it. She says, would you like me to do this and do this? And I said, yeah, that would be beautiful. And like 3 minutes later, it was done. It was just gentle, loving touch of my genitals. And we finished that night, and I showered off, and it was all beautiful. And the next morning we talked, and then she's talking about having to go home to the same place that her trauma came from and all this kind of stuff. And she was afraid. And I then found out, not until a long time later, but she spoke to a woman in our Tantra community that had similar traumas. And she twisted it and said, you should have never done that piece of the pleasure. And at the time when I asked for it, I wasn't really strong in asking for my stuff. And I felt a little guilty asking for to receive. And I'd given like 10 hours before that and 3 hours in the session. And I thought it was beautiful. So there was a tiny bit of that, of my own stuff going on there. But she talked to this woman, and then it got to the point where she said, you shouldn't have done that. And I'm like, hold on. I said, we made this agreement, and this was part of it. And we got to the end, and she says, I never want to talk to you again. And I was like, frick, I can't deal with this. And then about a week later, all of a sudden I'm getting demanded to show up at the Tantra woman's house with no support, no nothing. I felt like she was going to kill me because there was a lot of expressed energies that didn't belong to me. It had been projected through this experience because they didn't like it. And I had to fight for my life. There's no way I was going to meet with them. I even went to the level of like mediation, and the woman that did the mediation wouldn't even tell me who was coming to the mediation. Nope. So I was kind of left out in the cold, and I went to the mediation, and the woman had a 5-page prepared statement about her experience. And it wasn't even the woman of this experience I'm talking about. It was another woman that wanted to, she tried to have sex with me without telling her husband, and I said no. And then she was all hurt by it and said a bunch of things that weren't even true. But I went and listened to all of her stuff, and then when it got to the point where I was supposed to respond, it was like, I'm out of time and we're going to continue on and complete this. In the end, I was shrunk really small, and I had parts, like I said, and I got to look at every single thing of it. And I now understand how trauma works. Once a person's in their trauma, I'll tell you right now that the subconscious mind, when it's in trauma, will twist facts to align with its perspective. And it's not a safe place to be. So I now understand that going that deep, there needs to be another level of container of feminine support and other things that I couldn't possibly foresee at that time. But I was just proceeding down this track of giving these loving, beautiful, but I've looked at every single facet of what was there, and I didn't do anything wrong. It got tangled in a whole bunch of other trauma that I could not foresee. And I spent a year curled up in a ball thinking those people were going to show up on my front door and kill me, because they got in this restorative justice and social justice and all this kind of shit. And I never once even got to explain myself or how it happened or what my perspective was. And they're walking around saying like some rape happened, but it was nothing like it. It was the most loving, amazing experience I've ever shared with a person of active love. Like I didn't want this person sexually. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to give her a path to resolve that. And then they started saying, okay, well, where's your certifications and all this kind of stuff? And I now know I've looked. There is no certification for what I've learned and what I'm bringing from the past. And a lot of the certification agencies have tons of people that are going outside ethics and all this kind of stuff. It's just a symptom of that old world. So I couldn't find a place that met my level of integrity or whatever in exploring all that kind of stuff. But it was really hard to respond. But I can stand fully right now. But at that point, I was unsure of myself. And everything I do is in integrity, and everything I do is discussed before it's done, before any touch, full consent, no maybes, no kind of sortas or whatever, because that energy has to be present in every bit of this. And the trust and even the discussion and you trusting me and all that kind of stuff came from me testing it in fire. Like, did I do anything wrong? Did I miss anything? Did I not discuss it in detail? And they've come up every single time. I've never been able to tell it to anybody that I've been through that fire, and that it was disgusting. I still haven't even had an opportunity. I stood around these people and they're falling apart all around me and all this kind of stuff, but they've gotten in the middle of it. I can't even go back to the person that I shared that experience with to eventually get down to the bottom and maybe support her some more. But they're like, oh no, this is some person that's doing something bad. So God and the universe puts all these tests into us so that we're in full integrity. And I would not, I literally step out of being Paul to give the level of higher self respect and integrity that's needed. So I'm like so far out of sexual need and other things when I'm holding space for that. It's a beautiful place, but you have to have experienced it to be able to know that that's a truth. There's a Paul that had divorces and all this kind of stuff, and he's still cleaning up his shit. But there's also a Paul that's rock solid here, and you see it pop out of me all the time while we're talking. And this is divine, and that's all I've asked for, is have a platform to say that, for people to hear it. And I don't have to name names or say anything bad about everybody. Everybody was in a little bit of a trauma of their own. And I will tell you right now, sexual healing is completely for both. And any healer that's not for both is lying to themselves, because you wouldn't have got into healing unless you needed your own, and then eventually you build skills and eventually you'll step out. So my son's knocking on the door. Just have a sec. What time is it? Do you think we're done in the next 5 minutes?
For sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, this was great.
Okay. Cool. I got to drive myself.
No, this was perfect. I think everything flowed so beautifully. Like, this has been such an awesome conversation. I'm glad we were able to go live with it, because our first conversation was amazing. It was like 2 hours also.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's do more of them and get people brought in and talk.
Yes.
Like on these rooms, we can get people asking questions. And
for anyone listening, if they have questions, please leave a comment and we will get back to you. Like, Paul is a true, genuine healer, and just speaking to him, like, it just helped me flush my system. So I want to thank you for the work that you do, and I'm so grateful that we connected. Where can people find you? The
easiest way is just to find me at just my first name, Paul, Paul, at sexualityrising.com. I've got a website. It's really hard to present these things without getting censored and other stuff. So we don't talk about a lot of that stuff there, but it's just about our birthrights being stolen and other stuff. But everybody's got a different need, and they're going to have a picture of what they need in their mind. Just come and talk about it, or find me, Paul Hanrieder, on Facebook here, or whatever. I've also got a group called Awakening Through Sexuality. That's a private group where I share videos like this all the time, and we can start a conversation. And it's not for everybody. It's the probably 1% of the population that's going to really be drawn to this. But I will guarantee you right here and now that it's the fastest awakening method of clearing yourself up as possible, is to be able to go and start with your sexuality and get your sexuality back, and then build these processes, and orgasm after meditation, after clearing yourself, is going to show you new parts of you. And I want to build a community around people, because as your psyche breaks down, you need people to support you. And if it's a man that supported you to get through it, you sometimes are going to need some women to support you on the backside, because people will project and their subconscious will be trying to make stories up that aren't true. But we believe in a contract beforehand. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we agreed. Here's how you're going to feel afterwards. All this kind of stuff. We just put it all together, and it's different for everybody. And someday soon, I want to have workshops where people go and explore their edges, and they get into that without having to be sexual with people. But okay, we're going to this workshop, and you're going to take your clothing off just so that you work through all your shames or whatever with other people that want to work through those same shames. What an honoring, sacred space to do that. And you get to look at all your shames and your body image. And I'll tell you, a girl that's a 10 will say the same things that me that might think I'm a 3 or whatever, and got pudgy and bumps and all this kind of stuff. And it just makes you smile when you start to realize that everybody has got the same insecurities, no matter how beautiful or sexy or empowered they look. So.
Oh, it was so beautiful. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing all of this knowledge. I love it.
Same. I enjoyed. Thank you for hearing.
We will talk again soon. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.